The people of the Western Cape want to control their own police force. They elected a provincial government asking to control their own police force. The Premier of the Western Cape went to the National Council of Provinces and said, we want to govern our own police force. And the police minister said, no, you're not governing your own police force. You can't have what you want. We're going to tell you what we want. Now, that's a microcosm.
He wants majoritarianism to apply to advance his agenda in the Western Cape. But if you were to put critical questions to the vote, there would be many things, by the way, where the majority would say yes and Phil would say no, we must not do it. So this idea of projecting himself as if he's this Democrat, he wants the majority to, it's all nonsense, Donald. It's tendentious.
Hello, my name is Donald, and welcome to the #1 media company, WorldView. At WorldView, we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we're going to have a discussion on the state of South Africa and the issue of Cape independence. We are joined by Phil Craig, co-founder and spokesperson at the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and Prince Mashele, political analyst and the author of numerous books like The Fall of the ANC, What Next? So gentlemen, welcome. It's great to see you again. Prince, what is your opinion of this entire Farmgate saga? Do you think this is the end of Ramaphosa, or at the very least the end of Ramaphoria?
Thanks, Donald, for inviting me. Look, this is how I understand it. There was money stolen on the president's farm, and the amount of money involved is very scary. Allegedly $4 million. My sense is that if I had $4 million under my mattress and the South African state learns about it, SARS would be in my house, the South African Reserve Bank would be in my house, the police would be in my house wanting to know, where did I get this money from? Quite clearly, this has not happened to Cyril Ramaphosa until recently, after Arthur Fraser lodged a criminal complaint. So what do I read out of this? I think, in my view, there was a cover-up by the president. He knew that this happened. He confirmed recently that it happened, but he did not open a criminal case. If a theft like that happens in your house, you run to the police and open a criminal case. He did not do so. So my sense is that it was a cover-up, number one. Number two, I also think that the so-called investigation that is underway is also going to do the same thing that was done before, which is to cover up. Imagine the head of the Hawks investigating a sitting president, deciding that he is going to haul the president before the court of law and talking to the NPA, and they agree on that one. It would be scandalous for a sitting president to be moving between the union buildings and the court of law. So my sense is that this is a whole mess, and the gist of it, it's a cover-up. Is it the end of Ramaphosa? It is the end of Ramaphosa in terms of his image, his public image as Mr. Clean. Remember, in my view, Cyril Ramaphosa is the only remaining person in the ANC who has some semblance of morality and moral standing. The rest of the leaders in the ANC are thugs, and we all know that. So Ramaphosa's image as Mr. Clean in the public eye is gone. But Ramaphosa is not gone as a leader of the ANC. There is no one in the ANC who is cleaner than Ramaphosa. So he will win, in my view, in December. It will be thugs versus thugs.
Prince, I don't know if you know Dr. Piet Kroukamp, Koptu Kroukamp, and he recently is a political analyst, and he recently made a point that Ramaphosa is over it. The president is over being the leader of the ANC. He's over being the president of South Africa, and he basically is looking for a way out. And this is, to a degree, a way out. But if he's criminally investigated, he can say, okay, but now I have to stand aside. I can't be the president of South Africa anymore. So do you think there's any credibility to the argument that the president is looking for a way out, that he's over being the leader of the ANC or the president of South Africa?
No, I disagree. Look, he has been, calls have been made in the public domain by opposition leaders, by civil society activists that he should step aside, and he has refused. Look, there is no president or leader of a country who wants to leave power through a scandal. There isn't. All leaders of political parties of countries want to leave ceremoniously. They want to hand over peacefully, and they want to be remembered as having made a positive contribution to society. Cyril Ramaphosa is not unique. He wouldn't want to be remembered as someone was removed from office through a scandal. So he wants to continue to be the leader of the ANC, and he also wants to continue to be the leader of South Africa. In my view, he will continue to be a leader of the ANC. He will be re-elected in December. I don't see any credible threat, by the way, from the ANC against him. But the question is, will he lead South Africa beyond 2024? I doubt it. My prediction, by the way, and this is bold, is that in South Africa in 2024, there will be a new coalition government at a national level. If I look at the results of the previous local government elections, it's very clear the ANC is already below 50%. I cannot see the ANC coming back forcefully in KwaZulu-Natal. I cannot see the ANC coming back forcefully in Gauteng. Remember, the ANC got 36% in Gauteng for the first time, coming down from 43% in 2016. In KwaZulu-Natal, it got 41%. So if you look at that, you can see, and almost half of South Africa's population, by the way, is concentrated in these two provinces. And if you take the latest scandal facing Ramaphosa and the damaged brand of the ANC, I cannot see the ANC making any improvements in 2024. So Cyril Ramaphosa will not be the president of South Africa beyond 2024, not because he wants it, but simply because his party will fail to clinch a majority.
We recently spoke to John Steenhuisen, and he said he doesn't believe the ANC will continue to be united beyond this conference. He believes the ANC will split into two factions, that either the RET faction will break away or the reformist faction will break away by the end of the year. What do you think of that?
Look, here's the thing. The so-called reformist faction of the ANC, it's actually not reformist. It's a bunch of criminals who want to project themselves as decent human beings. But if you were to go and look very closely, you will find that all of them have what Matabile Dlamini referred to as smallanyana skeletons. And a prime example is Ramaphosa himself. The latest scandal, by the way, is not the only example of how crooked Ramaphosa is. You may recall there was a recording of the ANC's NEC meeting where Ramaphosa vowed before his party that he is prepared to fall on the sword to hide the fact that the ANC is stealing essentially public money. So this is a president, by the way, who has his own smallanyana skeletons. And if you look in his camp, which is generally referred to as a reformist camp, all of those people are dodgy. Who are you referring to there? You are referring to Gwedeman Tashe. I mean, this man, by the way, is known to be looting in the mining sector as we speak. You will struggle to find anyone in the so-called reformist camp of the ANC who is clean. So I don't buy this simplistic division of the ANC between reformists and RET. They are all the same. And yes, I think they will break up at some point. But at the time when they break up, by the way, they will be fighting over a carcass because their party will no longer be in power.
Interesting. So, Phil, what do you make of all of this? What do you make of Farmgate and the ANC's continued struggles to govern South Africa?
Well, where to start? I think Prince gave us the perfect example of why the Western Cape so desperately wants Cape independence, because we have to remember that for 28 years, the majority of Western Cape voters have rejected the ANC every single election. So if I can say what we're now describing, this disaster is a disaster not only not of the Western Cape's making, but the Western Cape for 28 years had voted against exactly this shit show, if I can call it, this unfolding disaster. I thought Prince's analysis was perfect. There was almost nothing I could disagree on. One that perhaps if I wanted to be petulant, I would say people don't go and report criminal cases to the police because the police are so dysfunctional that we know we're just wasting our time. We perhaps want an insurance number. We don't really expect the police to solve our crime. And I think the only other question I would ask Prince, because I agree with everything he said, is who is going to be the president post 2024. So I agree that the ANC are going to lose, or I suspect strongly that the ANC are going to lose their outright majority post 2024. But I think they're still going to have the president of South Africa, because I mean, what do we do? We're forced into coalitions, and I think this is one of the things that we've been saying for a number of years. The ANC at just below 50% are a far more dangerous animal than the ANC at just above 50%, because now they've got to make a deal with somebody. And actually, three political parties, I think in 2016, that the ANC, the EFF and the DA had 89% of the vote, and the other 45 political parties had 11% between them. So a coalition government effectively is either going to be with one of the parties and a few minnows, in which case it's still the same one party, or it's going to be a combination of one of those three, the DA and the ANC, the DA and the EFF, or the ANC and the EFF, and it's not going to be the DA and the EFF. So there will be. What do I fear the most? What I've always feared the most is an ANC EFF coalition. It's the most natural coalition, and actually, whatever problems we think we've got now as a country with a corrupt ANC government are going to pale into insignificance once we have an ANC EFF coalition government.
Prince, do you think that's the most likely outcome after the 2024 election?
No, I think that the coalition government that will be installed in South Africa will in the main be driven by four parties. It will be the DA, Action SA, the EFF, and the IFP. And I can explain to you why I think those four specific. Those will be the biggest parties. If you look at trends in KwaZulu-Natal, it's very clear that the IFP is growing significantly. And by the way, KwaZulu-Natal has numbers, is the second biggest province in terms of population in South Africa. So if the IFP were to take over KwaZulu-Natal, it would most probably stand between 10 and 11% nationally on the strength of the numbers in KZN. That would be significant enough to give the IFP a serious space in the coalition arrangement. So in other words, the other three parties wouldn't be able to constitute a government without talking to the IFP. But even if that were to happen, the IFP wouldn't demand to be president, because if you get about 10%, you wouldn't be the biggest party in that arrangement. The second party would be the DA. In my view, the DA could possibly be the biggest or the second biggest in the coalition arrangement. The DA is in decline, by the way. If you look at the recent elections, the local government elections, it's very clear the DA is in decline, and it will decline further in 2024. It will come, in my view, just under 20% in 2024. The vote, that vote of the DA is going in the main to two parties. It's going to the Freedom Front as well as Action SA. If you analyze the previous local government elections, this is where that vote is going. Now, then the third party is Action SA. You underestimate Action SA at your own peril. This party participated in the previous election in only 6 municipalities. It became the 6th largest party in South Africa, having participated in only 6 municipalities. We have more than 270 municipalities in South Africa. So Action SA, watch them. The third party is the EFF. Whether the DA likes or they don't like the EFF, somehow they will have to co-govern with the EFF, believe it or not. If you think that I'm talking nonsense, look at what is going on in Ekurhuleni now, where the EFF actually is a kingmaker. They installed the DA there. And I know, and the DA knows it, by the way, they can't dispute it. They are in underground talks constantly with the EFF to make sure that that government doesn't collapse. So I see the coalition government being driven in the main by 4 parties. Then fill your question. Who becomes president in such an arrangement? The president of South Africa, if we have such a coalition, will either be two individuals. By the way, one of them will be president, the other will be deputy, because the numbers will dictate. Either John Steenhuisen or Herman Mashaba. One of these will be, if we have such an arrangement, will be the president of South Africa, the other will be deputy. And the rest of them will be ministers. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario is an ANC-EFF coalition. I don't see that happening, especially if still Ramaphosa is still president of the ANC. Cyril Ramaphosa cannot coexist with the EFF. The bad blood between him and Julius Malema and the top leadership of the EFF is very serious. They cannot sit in one room and co-govern. The last scenario is the DA and the ANC. Even that won't happen, by the way. The DA, there are elements in the DA who want it. I saw a tweet by Helen Zille very recently, I think last week, that they were even entertaining the possibility of somewhere down the line forming a government. But the ANC factions will reject that. It will not be the DA. It will be the ANC factions rejecting that. Why? Because in the main, the ANC now is about thieves, it's about stealing. It's not about improving the lives of South Africans. They would know that if they were to go into a government with a DA, there would be no room, by the way, for them to dictate terms, one. Number two, there would be no room for them to steal. So I put my money on a coalition government led by the four parties. So in other words, I think that we are likely to see the first scenario I painted.
Phil?
Look, let's wait and see. So I've jotted the numbers as we speak. I don't think I disagree. I've got a marketing background, and I think the one question that we'll have over Action SA is, I think I agree, Action SA did phenomenally well in a small number of municipalities, which actually gave them a huge footprint. From a marketing perspective, it's much easier to do really well in a small number of municipalities where you can focus all your resources, you can focus all of your efforts, and whether actually Action SA have something that's scalable to that extent, it remains to be seen, and I guess we'll start to see that. So the honest answer is I don't know. I don't think any of us know. I think we've got an incredibly stable situation, and I'm sure Prince, the same as me, when I talk to people who are involved in these coalition governments, to a man, they all say they are absolute a nightmare. They are the worst scenario they could possibly imagine, and just trying to hold these things together at the most basic level is a full-time task and an absolute nightmare. And whatever we haven't got, whatever combination we get there, this isn't the cavalry coming over the hill that's going to rescue South Africa. We are in for an incredibly torrid ride, and I can't see the DA and the EFF getting back into bed, but I think if we do, we definitely don't think that's going to be a match made in heaven, do we? I think that's going to be fireworks from day one to the very last day. And will it last a week? Will it last a month? Will it last 6 months? Who knows? I can't see it happening, but it'll be interesting to see it unfold. I think what I think we can be sure of is we're in for a very rough ride.
Okay, so perhaps it'd be great to move on to the subject of Cape Independence. So Phil, can you give us a bit of a summary of the situation? What is the current situation with Cape Independence? For example, there recently was a Cape Independence march. Perhaps what do you consider it a success, that march?
Yeah, look, the march was absolutely a success, but I mean, obviously, marches are to a certain extent periphery issues. But it was well attended, it was well supported, and what was important for us, it was very diverse. It was very it was a real vibrant celebration of the Cape culture, and in many ways, it's a good way to sort of show what the movement's all about, as opposed to anything else. I think the Cape Independence movement is at a crossroads, absolutely a crossroads, and I think it can go one of two ways. I think in the first instance, we've done very, very well at establishing Cape Independence as a political option for the Western Cape. I think if we look back 2 or 3 years' time, nobody was talking about Cape Independence, and I think now Cape Independence is on the table. It's a position that's considered. Parties have had to take up positions on Cape Independence, and I think it's in the political mix, and I think that's been a real success and something that our organisation has been at the heart of. But I think there are some challenges for the Cape independence movement, and one of them is the lack of hard political support, because you have this juxtaposition, that most Cape independence supporters vote DA in the Western Cape, and most DA voters support Cape independence. So therefore, you have this uncomfortable relationship between the Cape independence movement and the DA. And if Cape independence is to happen, the Cape independence movement needs to influence the DA. And the DA, I guess, needs to circumnavigate the forces. And I think thus far the independence movement has done quite well. I think there are some challenges as we currently sit here at the moment, and one of the things they're working on hard behind the scenes is now to get the other players in the Cape independence movement onto that thing. And I think that's the issue. To what extent can the Cape independence movement put the DA under pressure, not to adopt Cape independence, but to continue with this neutral but relatively supportive neutral stance? And I think we saw going into the local elections, we got this concession that they were willing to fix the referendum legislation, they were willing to call referendums, and they're willing to include a question on Cape independence without necessarily supporting. And I think that kind of is the approach that we need to move forward with. And we must remember that the DA formally supports federalism, and there's a cigarette papers width between federalism and independence. Federalism effectively is internal self-determination, and the DA, although they're a federal party, don't actually push for federalism. But that'll be the interesting thing. To what extent are the DA going to start pushing for federalism as a response to the pressure on Cape independence? Because federalism is internal self-determination and secession is external self-determination. But effectively, it's about the people of the Western Cape having meaningful power to govern themselves and make political decisions for themselves, and to isolate this disaster that we're talking about, to say, well, look, this isn't of our making. We want to be governed, in the words of the African Charter on People and Human and People's Rights, we want to be governed according to our own freely chosen policy. And the people of the Western Cape are not governed according to their own freely chosen policy. They're governed according to the policy that they've rejected for 28 years, but have forced upon them by the South African majority in the other provinces. So look, so that's what we're heading for. We're heading for that, and we can chat maybe later about some of the things I think should be done. But let's see what happens.
Phil, just quickly, in terms of polling, how many people support independence and a referendum in the Western Cape, and how many people in the Democratic Alliance support a referendum and secession entirely?
Well, so we haven't polled for a few months now, but the last time that we polled, support for a referendum across the whole province was at 58%, and amongst Western Cape voters, support for independence outright was at 46%, and amongst DA supporters it was significantly higher. I think support for Cape independence itself was at 56%, and I think it was 65. I think it was 65% of DA voters in the province wanted a referendum on Cape independence.
And what is the situation with this bill now pending in Parliament that would give the premiers of provinces to call a referendum? Right? Do you need the support of the ANC to push that bill through?
Well, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. So of course that right already exists. So it's in the Constitution. It's in the National Constitution. It's in the Western Cape Constitution. What we've got is a scenario where the Constitution was written after the legislation, and the legislation hasn't yet been updated to take account of the current Constitution. So the law is actually unconstitutional. So one of the options is to bring it before Parliament and to pass a resolution that makes it constitutional, and that's what this bill does. Clearly, one of the other options were the ANC to stand in the way and basically go against the Constitution and refuse to pass the law, would be would then have to be to approach the Constitutional Court and demand that Parliament make the law constitutional. And AfriForum have already indicated that if the bill is opposed, that's what they'll do. So I think we'll get that. This right exists. It has to come in some shape and form. How the DA are going to how the ANC are going to respond in Parliament is a bit of an unknown, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they do respond.
So, Prince, what do you think of this entire Cape independence situation as it's playing out?
Well, this is where Phil and I are going to I was smiling as I was presenting, and he's chuckling because he can imagine. But I mean, it's an important debate for us to have, because it will allow us to assist South Africans to understand where South Africa comes from and where we are and where we could possibly go. Number one, South Africa comes from a history that is not very different from the picture that Phil has in mind. We were once a balkanized entity. We had 4 provinces: the Cape Colony, the Free State, the Transvaal, and Natal. To summarize life under that kind of South Africa, and Phil will remember this, it was characterized by conflicts when South Africa was like that. This province, they were actually states at the time. They were independent. So the Cape was independent. In other words, what Phil is calling for was there before in South Africa. There were fights, conflicts between people who came from these different states. And we know how the fights were resolved ultimately with the formation of the Union of South Africa, right? And by the way, the fights were not only among blacks and whites. The fights were even among whites and whites. The Anglo-Boer War, the Fourth Record, had nothing to do with blacks, although they participated, but in the main, those were fights among whites and whites. And even blacks at the time, blacks and blacks fought at the time when South Africa was like that. So that's where we come from. 1994, just before 1994, at the negotiations, there was a strong move by white people, in the main right-wing white people, who wanted a false start in South Africa. And at the time, by the way, they had identified the Free State as such a place. In other words, they wanted to be given a part of South Africa to govern themselves, to do what Phil is talking about, right? Obviously, we know they didn't get that. South Africa adopted the constitution that it did. I can see what is happening now, Donald. There is those people who failed at the negotiations in 1992 are now confident that what they wanted in the early 90s that they didn't get, the false start, they can now get in the Western Cape. They see that the DA, which is why, by the way, there's the discussion about the possibility of Cape independence. If you look at it, it's quickly linked to the DA. Why? Because the people who are moving for that, they understand that this is a political move, and therefore you need a political party or a political structure that will support it. And if you look at the possibilities in South Africa, the DA is the closest to that, which is why when they conduct a poll, they don't conduct a poll of members of the Good Party, they don't conduct a poll of members of the ANC, they don't conduct a poll of members of the PAC, they conduct a poll specifically of members of the DA. That tells you, obviously, the intentions. Let me tell you this, Donald. Phil said that they have made progress with regard to this Cape independence. They have made no progress because this discussion is taking place only in the Western Cape. In South Africa, by the way, no one is talking Cape independence in South Africa. I've never heard anybody who is serious in South Africa, in the wider South Africa, talking Cape independence. And there is absolutely no way the Cape can gain independence without the involvement of the rest of the South African population. In other words, whoever hopes and wishes to attain Cape independence will have to convince the rest of South Africa to agree with that, which is why ultimately this matter would have to be resolved in Parliament. It can't be resolved outside Parliament. If you think it can be resolved outside Parliament, you'll have to take up arms and fight the rest of South Africa and secede. And I can tell you, even if you were to think that you could take up arms and fight the rest of South Africa, you wouldn't win, you'd be blown up. It won't even take a day, by the way, for such a group to be blown up. So to cut a long story short, Donald, Phil and I will live and die before this Cape independence thing is real. It will not happen, unfortunately.
Well,
Well, I agree with the last word. Unfortunately, look, I disagree. So I agreed with just about everything Prince said on Ramaphosa. I disagree with about everything he said on Cape Independence. So look, first of all, the whole framing of the debate is wrong. Yeah, you can't look back in history 120, 130 years where to a time where might was right and people resolved their issues through military conflict and then draw comparisons with the time. At that point, everybody was fighting everybody. That was the history of the world. We're in a different place now, and I think it's really unjust and wrong to start equating Cape Independence with a false start. It's entirely different. The centre to Cape Independence is simply this: people have certain rights. South Africa is this big, diverse country. We signed up in 1994 to a bright, non-racial, collaborative future where we're all going to prosper together, and that isn't what's unfolded. What's unfolded has I use the word, and I hope it's not as a shit show of note. Actually, we've got a country that's falling apart at the seams, and we've got this ideological divide between the Western Cape. So you've got in 8 provinces, the ANC have been completely dominant, and actually we've got this breakaway with the EFF. And even in 2019, if we take away those 8 provinces and we put the ANC and the EFF together, 73.1% of people in the other 8 provinces in 2019 voted for either the ANC or the EFF, and 16% voted for the DA. And then you come to the Western Cape, and in the Western Cape you've got the DA in its third straight term, and the ANC have never had an outright majority in all 28 years. So you have this fundamental difference. The people of the Western Cape want to be governed one way, and the people in the rest of South Africa want to be governed another way. It's just pure democracy. And actually, you get to that point in time, and I accept that in political systems, there is an ebb and a flow, and this party gets in and that party gets out. That's part of the system. But people have to have skin in the game. And if you're living in a province where you just don't have skin in the game, you habitually have no prospect of getting the government that you ever want, and you have never had it, and you're never going to get it. It just comes down to democracy. So the rest of South Africa should be governed according to its democratic will. And the people of the Western Cape should be governed according to their democratic will. And actually, this is not Phil Craig. This is not the Cape Independence Movement. This is the foundation of the right of self-determination, which South Africa has signed it in. It's in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It's in the African Charter. It's in the founding documents of the United Nations. The right the African Charter says that all people inalienably are entitled to self-determination and to freely pursue their chosen policy. And the people of the Western Cape are no lesser than the rest of South Africa. And we've got to try, and if there's racism tied up in here, actually it's the racism of South Africa that somehow thinks that the people of the Western Cape are a bit less South African than they are. They somehow have lesser rights because perhaps they're minority groups. And actually, and what we're seeing is the tyranny of the majority, who is saying somehow the people of the Western Cape don't have the right to make decisions for themselves. And we saw that from Prince. You must come to Parliament. You must have our position. You must take our permission. Well, that's absolutely nonsensical. That actually is African nationalism, and underpinning that is racism. And I'm just going to read one little section here, because this particular issue has been grappled with already by international experts. And one of the key test cases was the case of Quebec, where Quebec wanted to secede or wanted to have a referendum on independence, and the Canadian Supreme Court considered the rights of the Quebec and Canada, and actually they brought in all of the globe and experts to consider it. And actually, in many ways, that case ultimately the Canadian court found that the Quebec people had self-determination and therefore didn't need to secede. But even having said that, this is what they said. It's not long, but it's significant. The continued existence and operation of the Canadian constitutional order could not be indifferent to a clear expression of a clear majority of Quebecers that they no longer wish to remain in Canada. The other provinces and the federal government would have no basis to deny the right of the government of Quebec to pursue secession, should a clear majority of the people of Quebec choose that goal, so long as in doing so, Quebec respects the rights of others. And I think that's the situation. The people of the Western Cape have got the right to self-determination should they choose to pursue it.
Well, what do you... Yes, go ahead, Prince.
Number one, you see, you can't use electoral numbers to make a case for Cape independence. The elections we have had in South Africa, whether in 2019 or before, or 2021, had nothing to do with Cape independence.
Sure.
Absolutely nothing to do with Cape independence. So it is actually tendentious for Phil. He's stealing numbers to make electoral numbers to make a case that has got nothing to do with electoral numbers. So he is actually trying. so we need to help Phil to understand that what he's doing is actually mischievous, number one, but we must also help those who are watching us to understand that they're being misled by Phil. So that's number one. Number two, even if we're to use electoral numbers, by the way, and grant Phil his moment of glory, he wouldn't sustain his case on the basis of those numbers alone, because he seems to associate the DA's electoral outcome with a pro-Cape independence sentiment. He seems to do so. That's why he's deploying those numbers. And he's wrong even on that score. Let me just demonstrate to you, Phil. If you look at the people who have voted the DA, by the way, constituting the 16% you were referring to, right? If I were to ask you, what percentage of those people come from the Western Cape? You would be shocked that actually the majority of the people who voted the DA actually don't come from the Western Cape, they come from Gauteng. You would be terribly surprised if we were to go with numbers. No. I mean, the Western Cape, by the way, in terms of population, is very insignificant compared to provinces like Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. And the DA gets voted in KwaZulu-Natal, it gets voted in Gauteng by more people than in the Western Cape. So having separated electoral numbers and having helped Phil understand that he shouldn't use electoral numbers to make a case for Cape independence. Let's now move to the substance of the argument. Look, Phil, here's the thing. The call for a false start was not a philosophical or an abstract call, was a concrete call. What did it mean? It meant this. White people who made that call in 1992, they identified a piece of land in South Africa where they wanted to govern themselves, right? And that piece of land was the Free State. You have now identified a piece of land yourself where you want to self-govern yourself, and you call it Cape independence. Where is that? You have told us it's the Western Cape. Now, you can't tell me that there is a difference between you and those who are calling for false start. There is no difference. The only difference is that you have identified a different piece of land, which is the Western Cape. Now, let's now move on so that we don't confuse the people who are watching us. If you were to give those white people who call for a false start the Free State, you know what they would have done? They would have constituted an army. They would have constituted a police force. They would have constituted possibly a stock exchange, and so on and so forth. All of that would constitute a state. If we granted you self-independence of the Western Cape and say, govern yourself, you would do exactly the same thing. You would have to have the police, because you can't govern the Western Cape without the police. You would have to have an army. You can't govern, otherwise you would be, your state would be vulnerable. So the point I'm making here, Donald, is that what Phil is calling for, it's not different from the false start that was called for in 1992. The last point is this. You can go and quote from Canada. And by the way, I'm aware of all attempts to secede all over the world. And I don't think we have time to go into case studies. Those case studies, Phil, let me tell you, you can call whoever is an expert and will not help you. Because ultimately, this matter will have to be decided in Parliament. And by the way, the Parliament is not the Parliament of the ANC. And this is the last point I want to make. You are making a big mistake of painting a picture that says the rest of South Africa belongs to the ANC. No, it doesn't. The rest of the South Africa belongs to me and you, by the way. It doesn't belong to the ANC. I don't vote for the ANC, by the way, if I were to play my cards open. The problems of South Africa, the rest of South Africa, yes, the ANC has contributed a great deal to them, and I am the first to acknowledge, but the rest of South Africa doesn't belong to the ANC. The ANC, it is possible for it to be voted out of power, and you can see if you look at electoral support that it is declining. The ANC now sits at 57% in the national level from the previous elections, all the way from almost 2/3 majority in 2004. Now, what are you going to tell me about this bulk of South Africans who have not voted for the ANC? I can tell you one thing about them. They actually don't want Cape independence. They don't want Gauteng independence. They don't want KwaZulu-Natal independence. They want the whole of South Africa to be a single unit. I want to come to Cape Town without a passport. Cape Town belongs to me. I want you, Phil, to visit me in Mpumalanga and feel that Mpumalanga belongs to you. I don't want this country to be balkanized and we go back to the days of the Anglo-Boer War and all that stuff.
Right, thank you. Okay, well, look, let's just, I'm going to correct you on a few points. I'm glad that I will be welcome in Mpumalanga and you'll always be welcome in the Western Cape and at my house too, Prince. First of all, I think you've completely misunderstood what I'm talking about the election. You're trying to say that we're equating support for the DA with Cape independence, which we're not. What we're trying to say is you can look at the election results for 28 years and see that the Western Cape fundamentally has a different political ideology to the rest of South Africa. And you can see that by the parties that it votes for. And that's an empirical fact. So what that is different, but we know that the Western Cape has fundamentally different political views to the rest of South Africa. And it may be that we're facing the same problems. The Western Cape can argue that those problems have been forced on it by South African voters. But even though we're facing many of the same problems, we still think the solutions are different. Because the Western Cape thinks one set of solutions is the answer, and South Africa thinks a different set. And we can see that by who they vote for. So Cape independence isn't the starting point. It's not an ideology. So first of all, there's a fundamental ideological difference between the Western Cape and the rest of South Africa. And democracy and international law and everything dictates that the people should be governed according to their chosen policy. That South Africa should be governed the way it wants to be governed. And if the people of the Western Cape no longer feel that actually being in South Africa is part of their best interest, they have a right to self-determination and they should be democratically free to pursue that. So that's the first thing. So what the voting records show is a distinct and absolute ideological differences between the two territories. When it comes to the decision, we're pushing for a referendum, a democratic referendum, which makes a complete nonsense of this keep constant reference back to whites. And and with respect, that's just a cheap shot that gets thrown out. It's far too easy just to accuse white people of being racist. It's absolute nonsense. I'm not racist. It's complete poppycock. It's actually about wanting to be governed the way that we want to govern. And the Western Cape is about 13% white. And for Cape independence to be carried on a referendum, we need more than 50% support. So actually, if Cape independence movement doesn't get, and our targets are, we think we'd need about 70% of white voters, about 60% of coloured voters, and about 20 to 25% of black voters to support Cape independence. And interesting enough, in our polling, on the year-on-year growth, the biggest growth in support for Cape independence came amongst coloured and black people, but particularly amongst coloured people. So it's got nothing to do with the folks. There is an ideological difference, and actually it's slightly offensive. So it's fine. I have no problem, and I admire you wanting us all to be one country. And actually, I wasn't here in in 94, by the way. I'm an immigrant myself. I came to South Africa in 2004. So I came knowing what I was letting myself in for. But actually, the South Africa that I came to is a very different place to the South Africa I find myself in today. Because in 2004, it was a country of hope, a country of growth, a country that was pursuing sensible paths. And now, actually, it's a failing state. And it doesn't really matter how many people in the rest of South Africa stay away in protest. The bottom line is the rest of South Africa has appointed the ANC as its government, continues to appoint the ANC as its government, and they've made those choices, and the people of the Western Cape are having those choices forced upon them against the democratic will. And this whole notion of, I hate this talk. It's a bit insulting to have this talk of violence and this talk of this and about how you're going to fight and it's not your right. The people of the Western Cape have a right to democracy. We're no lesser or no more. We're not superior to the people in the rest of South Africa, but neither are we inferior. And my whiteness or somebody else's colouredness doesn't make us any less South African. It doesn't make us any less deserving of self-determination. It doesn't make our democracy any more worthless. We live in the Western Cape, and if we choose that our future democratically through a referendum is better outside of South Africa, that's our right to make that decision. It's not yours in Mpumalanga to dictate to us what we can and can't do because there's more of you there than there are of us here. It's our right. And actually, it's the right to self-determination, and it must be made democratically. And actually, the people who are opposed to Cape independence must come and make that. We must have the referendum, and the people who are opposed to it must make the arguments against it. The people who are in favour must make the arguments for it, and the people must decide for themselves democratically. And we must all agree to peacefully accept the outcome.
Donald, I'm sorry. We'll have to. I hope you will allow this debate to flow.
Sure.
Yeah, look, this is a substantive debate, and I'm sure I can see Phil is enjoying it. I'm enjoying it too. Now, Phil, I want to attend to the points you made.
Sure.
Firstly, you are making a claim that the people of the Western Cape prefer a different ideology to the people of South Africa.
Yeah.
You are completely wrong. And I'm amazed. I'm amazed that you just throw things like ideology. I'm a political scientist, by the way, by training. And you said you have a marketing background. So I understand that you may actually not be familiar with some of these concepts. You don't tell us the ideology that the people of the Western Cape prefer. Self-government is not an ideology. It's absolutely not an ideology. Now, let me give you an example. There is a difference between capitalism and communism. Those are ideological differences. So the people of the Soviet Union at some point preferred to be communists. The people of the US preferred to be capitalists. And there was a Cold War over which model is best to organize society. Those were ideological differences. Throughout this discussion up to where we are, you have never told Donald nor me what is the ideology of the people of the Western Cape. Absolutely none. You know why Phil is not telling us, Donald? It's because what he's talking about doesn't exist. The people of the Western the people of the Western Cape, by the way, I'm in and out of the Western Cape, by the way. I'm even coming there for a holiday this December. I have friends and so on. They are not different from me, who come from Mpumalanga, or from a white person who comes from KwaZulu Natal or Gauteng. In the main, I can paint a picture. Generally, my sense is that the people of the Western Cape want a free market economy. That's what we want in Mpumalanga. And by the way, that's not only what we want in Mpumalanga, that's what is happening in Mpumalanga. There are mines in Mpumalanga. There are farms in Mpumalanga, just like in the Western Cape, there are farms. So free enterprise is something that most South Africans, by the way, embrace. They don't embrace communism. Any party that has said is a communist party in South Africa, in the history of South Africa, has never succeeded. The reason why the ANC has succeeded in the main is because it has embraced capitalism. So this claim that the people of the Western Cape somehow are ideologically unique It's a fallacy. There is no evidence you can produce to support that point. Number two.
Sorry, Prince, just a clarification. You're saying the ANC embraces capitalism?
Oh, of course it does. I mean, in the latest State of the Nation address, if you want evidence, what did Ramaphosa say? And was uploaded by the DA, by the way. He said the role of the state is to manage. He said the role of the private sector is to create jobs, not the state. He said it in the latest State of the Nation address, and it was uploaded by the DA. And I agree with him, by the way. And if you look at the ANC since 1994, the ANC, in the way it has managed the state, it has not been a communist party, which is why if you go to the Western Cape, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, you will find free enterprises all over the show. Of course, I agree with Phil. The ANC, in terms of its governance across South Africa, it has been a disaster. I'm with you, Phil, by the way. I would want to see the ANC out of the union buildings as soon as possible. But we must not confuse our dislike or our disagreement with the ANC for a preference for federalism or to balkanize South Africa. The people of South Africa want to be united. They don't want to be divided. You know why they want to be united? It's because they come from a divided past and they don't want to go back there. And in that past, and it's not insulting to say this, it's just historically correct. They used to fight. They used to fight on the basis of race. They used to fight on the basis of tribe. They used to be restricted movement. They don't want that. They want to be united. So, to be honest, if you were to conduct a referendum, I'm not sure if Phil would win, by the way. In any case, even if Phil were to win, you would have to convince the rest of South Africa, by the way.
Well, look, there's a different legal argument, and that just doesn't. So look, that certainly is an argument reported in terms of the Constitution, but that's not how it works in practice. Look, but I think there'll have to be a negotiated settlement, and I think that ironically that section that I wrote from the Canadian Constitution would perfectly illustrate the process that would have to be followed. But I come back to you again. Look, I'm sorry. To suggest that somehow I don't understand ideology and therefore that there is no ideological divide. That's the nonsense. You know, why do you think people vote DA in one part of the country, and why do you think they vote ANC in the other part of the country? And then what happens when they get fed up with the ANC? What's happened in the rest of the country? No. So the DA have a much more free market orientated. You know, and I made a quick list while we were talking. You know, one supports cadre deployment, one doesn't. One supports race-based policy, one doesn't. One supports state-owned enterprises, the other supports privatization. It's the classic socialism against capitalism. Now, obviously, I agree with you. The ANC is not a classic communist party or socialist party, but I think three of its presidents have belonged to the Communist Party. It's influenced by the National Demographic the National Democratic Revolution. It's a socialist-leaning organisation which has embraced aspects of capitalism largely so they can steal us blind. But actually, it has intervention running through its veins. What we've got a problem. Let's intervene. Let's make a rule for this. Let's make a rule for that. And that's what's dragged our economy to its knees. And on the other side, you've got the Western Cape, and increasingly the DA that's much more capitalistic, much more free market oriented, and actually now has embraced genuine non-racialism and is moving away from those things. They're two fundamental ideologies. And what happens in the Western Cape as the DA has started to struggle in the Western Cape, and it has started to lose support there. Who are they going for? Either you've got coloured voters who are going towards coloured nationalist parties, and you've got white voters moving towards more white nationalistic parties. And in the rest of South Africa, you've got most people who are leaving the ANC are going to the EFF. And actually, as you've seen a decline in the ANC support in the rest of South Africa, you've seen an increase in the support of the EFF, and it became the fastest growing party. And I accept we've got to wait and see what happens with Action SA. But actually, at this point in time, so there's this clear ideological divide. It's not a crisp historical textbook divide that says, listen, hang on a second, we've got Lenin on the left, you know, and I don't know who we're going to pick for capitalism on the right. But Clearly, there's a difference in ideology and who they vote for. You can go and look at the IEC. You can go and see who did they vote for. One territory consistently votes for one party. The other territory consistently votes for another party. And clearly, that's underpinned by the ideologies that those parties believe in.
Phil, you know, I'm amazed. You're saying that the majority of South Africans are voting for the ANC and they're now going to the EFF. I wonder where the evidence is, because
IEC.
No. I don't know which IEC you're talking about. Yeah. You can Google this, by the way. The biggest party in South Africa, as we speak, is the ANC. The second biggest party in South Africa, as we speak, is the Democratic Alliance. Now, where is the EFF? Where are these South Africans who are in their numbers going to the EFF? By the way, the EFF is sitting around 11%. That is absolutely nothing in percentage terms compared to the DA's about 23%.
Sure.
Now, so at least, Phil, if you and I are going to have a sound discussion, let us respect basic facts first. You see, so that we don't get drawn into the Trumpian discourse of shouting and distorting facts and ending up chasing our tails as if we'll chase our tails without even knowing what we're talking about. The facts are, it is not true that there is a shift towards the EFF. By the way, if you look at the results of the local government elections last year, you can see the EFF is stagnating. In places like Johannesburg, by the way, it has receded. The Action SA got 16% ahead of the EFF. So what you are talking about, it's not supported by numbers. Number two, and the last point on this one, you are painting a picture as if the people of the Western Cape are unique and they have no right to vote. The people of the Western Cape have never been prevented from voting. They have been voting since 1994, which is why in the process they were able to remove the ANC from power and installed their preferred government, which is the Democratic Alliance. It's governing your province as we speak. They have been voting for their local leaders in local municipalities. Now, I don't understand this impression you are trying to create as if for some reason the people of the Western Cape are oppressed. They are not oppressed. They are expressing their democratic right. They have been doing so since 1994. So what is wrong with that?
Well, that's just so. Look, that's just a very selective, as it is with statistics. As it look at the EFF have increased at every election. Now, accepting that the local elections they didn't do very well in this last local elections, we can see if we take the last decade that to say that the support hasn't gone from the ANC to the EFF is clear nonsense. It's we can go and look at the EFF. Have there been pockets where different things happened? Has Action SA had a specific influence in Gauteng, which is obviously an urban settlement and different to large parts of South Africa? But over a period of time, there's a clear movement. The EFF has been formed and grown. The ANC has declined, and voters are moving from the ANC to the EFF. I agree, the EFF have got a glass ceiling, but that's happening. This argument that people of the Western Cape have got democracy is nonsense. And it's much like arguing that the Bantustans had authority during apartheid. It doesn't make any difference. The ANC, the people of the Western Cape, cannot be governed according to their policy. Yes, they can elect the provincial government, but what's the provincial government want? The provincial government says, well, hang on a second, we'll get elected on a ticket saying we want to control our own police force. We've got the second highest murder rate of any. The Western Cape would be the country, if it was an independent country, with the second highest murder rate in the world. We've got chronic crime in the Western Cape. The police are dysfunctional and underfunded, and the people of the Western Cape want to control their own police force. They elected a provincial government asking to control their own police force. The Premier of the Western Cape went to the National Council of Provinces and said, we want to govern our own police force. And the police minister said, no, No, you're not governing your own police force. You can't have what you want. We're going to tell you what we want. Now that's a microcosm of because yes, they can elect the provincial party, but the powers that the province have got are pitiful. They can't control economic policy. They can't get rid of race-based policy. They can't pursue all sorts of things that they want to do. They can't generate their own electricity the way that they want. I mean, finally, we've made some progress there. They can't run the railways. So the people of the Western Cape cannot govern the Western Cape the way that they want. They actually govern the Western Cape according to the South African Constitution, and in the schedules at the end, Schedule 4 and Schedule 5, there's a pitiful little list of things that the Western Cape can do if it wants to. And so actually to suggest that the people of the Western Cape have meaningful democracy because they were allowed to vote, even though they never get the party they want, but actually they can have a provincial party which has got no real power, is exactly like saying, well, what are you talking? What was the problem with apartheid? You know, at the end of the day, you had all of these Bantustans, you had power. There wasn't really a problem. You could have elected what you want. What you're complaining about? Exactly the same thing.
Well, Phil, the people of the Western Cape, by the way, were there in 1992 negotiating the arrangement we have now. You were not here, obviously. Maybe you don't remember that. So it's not as if the system we have here, Donald. The people of the Western Cape had no say in constructing. They were there. They participated. They accepted it, that this is going to be the order of the day in South Africa. Long before Phil came from, where were you, Phil, Britain or Canada? So the people of the Western Cape, the people of the Western Cape, what you are asking for, they rejected in 1992. In fact, as they watch you going around, they are wondering, where does this one come from? Because we negotiated a good deal.
But I mean, but 30 years ago, are they now? I accept. So I've got no gripe against the system that we're in. We accepted the system. But that doesn't mean we're forever trapped in it. That's not how self-determination works. Now we're in a scenario where we've had 30 years worth of history. We can now see how it's panned out. It's been a disaster, and we'd be far better off if we governed ourselves. And actually, with a few pitiful powers that the Western Cape has got, other than crime, the Western Cape outperforms the rest of South Africa by virtually every objective measure. And if we could just have, and when we polled, something like 78% of people of the Western Cape wanted more powers for the province. They're being denied what they want. And actually, yes, we agreed to the system, and now we're asking for a referendum to see if we still agree with that system, or actually we'd rather have a different system. And if we now want something different, what's it cost South Africa? Why would South Africa want to impose its will on the Western Cape? If the majority of the people in the Western Cape want to go their own way, why would South Africa feel they'd want to take up arms or to oppress the people of the Western Cape and deny them their will? That would be colonialization. It's not there now, but if the Western Cape people democratically express a will to govern themselves, and South Africa say, we're not going to let you, we're going to make you do what we want, that's colonialism.
Well, Donald, just the last point. If you were to conduct a poll among Black people and ask them, do you want white people to leave South Africa? There is a possibility the majority of them would say yes. I would take up arms against such Black people and say, I don't want that to happen. Even if you, the majority of Black people, want it, never, it won't happen. But I would also use the Constitution of South Africa to actually defend not only white people, but anybody else against majoritarianism. Phil is very tendentious, by the way. There are certain things he knows he will never support the opinion of the majority. There are certain things he wants, when it's convenient for him, he wants majoritarianism to apply to advance his agenda in the Western Cape. But if you were to put critical questions to the vote, there would be many things, by the way, where the majority would say yes and Phil would say no, we must not do it. So this idea of projecting himself as if he's this Democrat, he wants the majority to, it's all nonsense, Donald. It's tendentious. And we must call it that.
Okay, Phil, last words. I see we're running out of time.
Look, I think we've both had a good-natured and a good-spirited debate, and I've immensely enjoyed it. And I can see Prince's 2 and A, and I think we've covered a lot of this topic from two different sides, and in exactly the spirit the debate should take place. And I'm happy to end it as that. Thank you, Prince. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. Phil, what are your predictions for the debate this weekend? Or this week, sorry.
Well, I guess in many ways it might be less lively, and I doubt it'll such a wonderful spirit. But I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a healthy debate, and I think it's great that we have these conversations, and out of that, we're all enlightened through debate.
The debate we're referring to, Prince, is an in-person debate between Phil, Ibrahim Rasool, Corné Mulder, Fakie Mentor, and Tasha Simmers from the DA. It's happening here in the Western Cape. Is there anything you want to add before we conclude, Prince?
Look, I think Phil and I, and we need to thank you, Donald, because you provided this platform. I think we are the perfect example of how debate and discourse should be handled in South Africa. We as a country, we have reached a very dangerous point where we can no longer disagree with civility. And we seem to regard each other as enemies. We are not enemies. We are differing on models of better running and organizing our society. And we should have debates without being personal, and focus on substance. And I enjoyed this discussion. And by the way, nothing is taboo in South Africa. We need to talk about anything. So I'm very happy that Phil is passionate about his cause, even though I disagree with him. I think this is perfectly fine.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's what we're trying to achieve on WorldView, having these debates, having these public discussions. So gentlemen, thank you so much for making it time. To our viewers, you most certainly enjoyed this content. Show your appreciation by liking this video, sharing it as widely as possible, and subscribing to our channel for more such content. My name is Donald, and you've been watching WorldView.